My parents invited me to a fancy family dinner, but told me to sit at the youth table, while my married siblings sat with the grown-ups. I quietly got up and left. Hours later, they were desperately calling me. The city's pulse was my heartbeat, its vibrant chaos a canvas for my dreams. I was Sarah, a 29-year-old graphic designer, thriving in the electric buzz of urban life. But beneath the surface, there was a crack, a fissure in my world that threatened to split wide open. That autumn evening, as the leaves turned and fell, I received an invitation from my parents, a gilded promise of family unity. Little did I know, it would be the night that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, acceptance, and the true cost of tradition. As I prepared for the dinner, a storm brewed within me, one that would soon engulf my entire family. The city's heartbeat was a constant, pulsating rhythm, one that I had grown to love over the years. My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old. My life was a tapestry of vibrant colors, woven from the threads of my freelance graphic design work. I lived in a small, cozy apartment, right in the heart of this urban jungle, where the energy of the city never ceased to inspire me. But my family, they were a different story. My parents, Elizabeth and Richard, clung to traditions like ivy to an old stone wall. They valued marriage and family above all else, a sentiment that often left me feeling like the odd one out. My siblings, Emily, who is 32, and Michael, who is 35, both married with children, were the stars of our family gatherings, their lives a stark contrast to mine. One crisp autumn evening, as the city began to cool down from its summer fervor, I received an invitation. It was from my parents, an ornate piece of paper that hinted at something more than just a casual dinner. The invitation was for a fancy family dinner at their sprawling suburban home. The thought of it sent a mix of excitement and apprehension through me. Here was a chance, perhaps, to reconnect, to show them the woman I've become, beyond the career-focused, single daughter they often saw. I remember the feel of the invitation in my hands, the embossed letters spelling out my name, the promise of a night that could either bridge gaps or widen them. The anticipation was palpable, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas, full of potential and uncertainty. As I prepared for the evening, my mind wandered to the last family gathering, recalling the sense of unease I felt then. The dinner arrived, and I took extra care with my appearance, choosing a sleek black dress that made me feel both elegant and confident. As I drove up to my parents' house, the driveway was lined with luxury cars, a testament to the affluence of my siblings' spouses. The house was lit up, music and laughter spilling out into the cool night air. Upon entering, I was greeted warmly by my parents, who complimented my attire. My mother's eyes sparkled with approval as she said, "Sarah, you look stunning tonight." My father, always the charmer, added, "Absolutely radiant, my dear." Their warmth was genuine, but it was short-lived. My mother, with a slight, almost imperceptible shift in her tone, directed me towards the youth table at the far end of the dining room. I felt a pang of disappointment as I walked past the main table, where my siblings sat with their partners all dressed in their finest. Emily, with her perfect hair and her husband's arm around her, looked every bit the part of the successful lawyer's wife. Michael, with his booming laugh, was sharing a story that had everyone at his end of the table in stitches. Their children, all dressed up, were at a smaller table nearby, giggling and playing with their food. At the youth table, I found myself seated with my teenage cousins, who were engrossed in their phones, barely acknowledging my presence. The contrast was stark. Here I was, a grown woman, relegated to the children's table. I tried to engage with them, asking about school or their latest interests, but their responses were monosyllabic, their attention clearly elsewhere. I couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation, not just from the physical distance between the tables, but from the emotional chasm that seemed to widen with each passing moment. As the dinner progressed, I watched from afar as my siblings and their spouses mingled with my parents and other adult relatives. The conversation was lively, filled with tales of business successes, family vacations, and the latest in their children's lives. I felt a pang of isolation, not just physically, but emotionally, as if my life's choices had somehow made me less worthy in their eyes. Then, the main event of the evening was announced. My parents stood up, clinking their glasses for attention. They shared the news that they were planning to sell the family home, a decision that would affect all of us. They intended to divide the proceeds among their children, but with a catch. Only those who were married would receive their share immediately. The rest would be held in trust until they tied the knot. The room fell silent, the clinking of cutlery against plates the only sound for a moment. My heart sank. Here was the moment, the revelation of my family's true colors, painted in strokes of conditional love and traditional expectations. I looked around, seeing the shock on the faces of my siblings, though their expressions quickly morphed into acceptance or perhaps resignation. Emily's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of sympathy there before she turned away, her hand tightening around her husband's. Michael, ever the pragmatist, was already discussing with his wife how they would use their share. My parents continued, explaining the logistics, their voices a distant hum in my ears. I felt a surge of defiance, a fire kindling within me. This wasn't just about money, it was about validation, about being seen as an equal part of the family. I stood up, my chair, scraping against the polished wood floor, drawing all eyes to me. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "You're tying our worth to our marital status. What about our achievements, our independence, our choices to live life on our terms?" The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. My mother's face tightened with disapproval as I voiced my concerns. The revelation hit me like a cold wave. I sat there, the laughter and chatter around me turning into a distant buzz. My parents' words echoed in my mind, a clear message about their values and expectations. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a sudden clarity. Without making a scene, I quietly excused myself from the youth table, my heart heavy, but my resolve firm. I walked out of the house, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. My parents' calls followed me, but I didn't turn back. I drove away, the city lights blurring through my tears. The streets were alive with the nightlife, but inside my car it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being an outsider in my own family. Their expectations, their conditional love, it was all too much. The drive was long, and with each mile, I felt the weight of their judgment lifting, replaced by a sense of freedom, albeit tinged with sorrow. I found myself parking near the river, where the city's skyline reflected in the water, a beautiful chaos of lights and shadows. I sat there watching the water flow, thinking about the life I had built for myself, independent and full of passion for my work. But tonight, it felt like I was at a crossroads, not just with my family, but with my own identity. The phone in my pocket buzzed incessantly, but I ignored it. I knew it was them, perhaps realizing the gravity of what they had just done, or maybe just calling to check if I was all right. But I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. I needed this moment to myself, to reconcile with the fact that my family might never truly understand or accept me for who I am. As I sat there, the city's pulse seemed to sync with my heartbeat, each throb a reminder of my resilience, my strength. I thought about the future, about what this might mean for my relationship with my siblings, with my parents. Would they see the error of their ways? Or would this dinner be the wedge that finally drove us apart? The night grew colder, and I knew I had to make a decision. The skyline, with its towering buildings and twinkling lights, seemed to offer me a silent nod of approval. I took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in my lungs, and made my choice. Hours passed, and my phone, which I had silenced, began to light up with missed calls and messages from my family. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I realized that my absence had caused a stir. My siblings were calling not just out of concern, but because they needed me to agree to the terms of the inheritance. I sat in my apartment, the city's skyline a silent witness to my contemplation. Should I answer and negotiate my place in the family? Or should I let them stew in their own regret, realizing the worth of the sister they had marginalized? The phone buzzed again, and this time it was Emily. Her voice, when I finally picked up, was a mix of worry and urgency. "Sarah, where are you? We've been trying to reach you all night." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, feeling the power of my position. "I needed some time to think, Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not sure I can just accept what Mom and Dad decided." There was a sigh on the other end, a sound of frustration or perhaps relief that I had answered. "I know it's not fair, Sarah. Michael and we talked about it. We think you should have your share regardless of, well, you know." Her words were a balm, yet they didn't erase the sting of exclusion. "And what about Mom and Dad? Do they agree?" Emily hesitated, and I could almost see her biting her lip, a habit she had when she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like. They're coming around, but they need to hear from you. They need to understand that this isn't just about money, it's about respect, about acknowledging who you are." The skyline seemed to blur as I considered her words. The city was a place of freedom, of endless possibilities. But here I was, tethered. By family, I chose to let the night pass without responding. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of apologetic texts and voicemails. My parents had realized the error of their ways, or at least the potential fallout from their decision. They invited me for a private lunch, promising a new discussion about the inheritance and my role in the family. I arrived at the restaurant, a quaint little place with ivy creeping up the walls, much like the traditions my parents clung to. They were already seated, their faces a mixture of concern and contrition. My mother stood up, her arms open for a hug, which I accepted, though my heart was still guarded. "Sarah, we owe you an apology," my father began, his voice unusually soft. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened last night, and we realize we made a grave mistake." My mother nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We were wrong to tie your worth to something as arbitrary as marital status. It was unfair, and we're sorry." The words felt like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my hurt. They continued, explaining that they had revised their plan. Now, all their children, regardless of marital status, would have an equal share of the inheritance. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. I had stood my ground, and in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but also reshaped my family's dynamics. As we ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the weight of the previous night's events lingered. My parents asked about my work, genuinely interested for perhaps the first time in years. They listened as I described my latest project, a graphic design for a local artist's album cover, my passion evident in every word. The lunch ended with a promise from my parents to respect my choices and to see me for who I am, not for what they expected me to be. We parted with hugs, their warmth now feeling more genuine, less conditional. Driving back to my apartment, I felt a mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, but also a lingering sadness for the years spent feeling like an outsider. Yet, there was also hope. Hope that this change would lead to a more understanding and inclusive family dynamic. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.